Before you learn a language, you usually ask what it means. But there's another question that matters more. What does it feel like to hear it? Klingon was one way into that idea. Ewok is almost the opposite. One of the things that fascinated me about Return of the Jedi as a kid was that it actually felt alien. Not just costumes, not spaceships. The whole world felt completely inhabited. The creatures had languages. The background characters had languages as well. Even the music in Jabba's palace was being sung in a language that didn't exist. And as a kid, that mattered more than I realized, because it meant the world extended past the edges of the story. It didn't feel staged. It felt lived in. And honestly, part of why those original films still feel real is because so much of it physically existed. They had models, they had puppets, costumes, actual sets. You could feel the texture of it. And on top of that, they created languages for those cultures too. Not because the audience needed to translate them, but just because the world itself felt more believable that way. And that's part of what I want to talk about today. Not just the Ewok language itself, but why it feels so natural inside the world of Star Wars. I don't want this to turn into an uninterrupted TED Talk about Ewok phonetics. I've genuinely been weirdly interested in this language since I was a little kid. I had the old Kenner Ewok village, the figures, I had the records as well. And honestly, some of my favorite parts of Return of the Jedi weren't even in English. There was the Ewok Village song, and there was a song by Cy Snoodles singing in Jabba's palace. I remember that name because I had it on the action figure. I remember all of those names from the action figures for some reason. That really stuck. It's really deep in there. Anyways, those weird alien languages they made the world feel larger somehow. And in the newer versions, a lot of that got replaced or cut, which I think is tragic, honestly. I used to listen to those tracks over and over again, not understanding any of it, but it still felt like it meant something. When people hear Ewok, they usually don't think, I have no idea what this means. They think, oh, I kind of get this, even if they don't really get it. The feeling isn't accidental. The language was developed by Ben Burt, the same sound designer behind a lot of the Star Wars movies. And instead of making a language or something completely strange, he pulled pieces from real actual languages like Tibetan and Comic, bits and pieces of things that already existed. Not because anybody was going to study Ewok grammar. Honestly, most kids watching Return of the Jedi weren't exactly diagramming Ewok sentences. I certainly wasn't. George Lucas just needed the world to feel real. And part of making a world feel real is making it sound like people actually live there. So starting with the sound, try this out. I can speak a little Ewok. It's pretty much just the song lyrics, but yub nub e chuta, yub yub nub nub chub chuta, e yub nub. Feels easy, right? Your mouth just kind of falls through it. Nothing catches, nothing fights you. It almost feels musical. Almost. Honestly, it's kind of hard to sound intimidating in Ewok. Now compare that to something like Thingen kapla, Haglume gak jaj mifam, Thingen ma, and that's Klingon. Your mouth has to work. Suddenly your jaw is participating in the language. It tightens, it pushes. There's lots of stops and clusters, and you actually get cramps in your jaw. Those sounds just don't work. They work, but they just don't feel They just don't quite settle, I guess. And your body notices that immediately before you understand anything. Ewok just kind of slides by your defenses. You stop noticing the language almost immediately, and your brain starts grouping the sounds together before you even know what anything means. And because of that, it never really feels hostile. It feels familiar fairly quickly, like your brain already decided. Yeah, okay, I can work with this. That's your brain speaking. Klingon keeps you slightly off balance. You're always catching up to it. Ewok does the opposite. You stop fighting the language almost immediately. I don't think Ewok feels real because it's realistic. In all honesty, most of it is probably nonsense, but it borrows just enough from real speech patterns that your brain relaxes into it almost immediately. I think that's why it works. Not because you understand it, but because it feels like something you could understand if you stayed there long enough. And I think that's part of why worlds stay with people. Not because every detail was explained, but because it felt like life was happening just outside the frame. The languages were part of that. They made the world feel bigger than the story you were watching. And suddenly you weren't just looking at an alien world anymore. You felt like you overheard one.